say they are only empty words. I have counsel and strength for the war. Now on whom do you reply that you have rebelled against me? Now behold, you reply on half of the staff in this crushed tree, even on Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So if the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, all you rely upon him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and he said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem.
Thank you very much for being here today. It's truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to come and speak before you here this morning. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this worship here with you this morning. One thing I do want to say before we get started is remember Dawn in your prayers, Rebecca's boyfriend. I guess things are starting to take a turn for the worse with Dawn. He was supposed to have a surgery for a pituitary tumor, and it was delayed because his blood pressure was low. Now, it seems like there's just all kinds of things that's going on with him right now, and it just seems like he's not good. I think they've taken him to the emergency room a couple times, and there's been a lot of challenges for Rebecca in the past year, and they have not been easy. So do not only remember Dawn in your prayers, but also remember Rebecca in your prayers as they are just dealing with very difficult health issues. What I want to talk about here this morning is what Carter read there. I think I like Carter's translation a little bit better. It says, who do you have your confidence in? And if you look through the passages, it tells us, who do you have your trust in? Who do you rely on? And that's really the thing I want us to get through here today is this, who do we rely on when it comes to God? King Hezekiah, who is the king of Judah at this time, has been met by the king of Assyria. And he asks him really three questions on who does he rely on. And he gives justification on every one of those things that he tells him he believes that he is relying on. He thinks that he is relying on his own way. He believes he's relying on other people to help him. He also talks about, do you rely on your God to help you? And if you follow along there in 2 Kings chapter 19, you see this does have a happy ending. However, though, there is this kind of notion that we forget about King Hezekiah really relying on other things here before he takes a heavy reliance on God. And that's what I want us to look at here this morning. When it comes to you and I, do we trust ourselves more than we trust God? Do we trust our friends more than we trust on his word or his will? Do we rely on God only when we feel it's convenient to rely on God? And sometimes even Christians today put more reliance on other things than God. And that's what I want to talk about here today. And I hope we think about things within our own heart about how we should have this faith in him. We should have this whole trust in him. So I hope you'll follow along with some of the thoughts I had on these few passages. And one of them, when we talk about the mere words, just go to Proverbs chapter 16, verse 25. And we see that there is a way that seems right unto man, but the end is the ways of death. And that's what the king of Assyria says to Hezekiah. Do you trust in yourself? Do you trust in the things that you think and trust in the ways that you believe in? And it's not necessarily the things of God. It is really the things of King Hezekiah that he relies on first. And sometimes we think that we have the right way. We do this really a lot spiritually. We think that the majority of us will, when it comes to spiritual things, will go along with the crowd. And we won't realize that 99% of our thoughts and actions really go along with our culture. It's something our parents did. It's something our friends did. It's something that we have become a pattern to. And sometimes we follow along that pattern, just like we talked about in our Bible study, where we see that sometimes someone doing the wrong thing, people will carry on that wrong pattern. And if you look there in Kings, you see that the reason why Israel's been taken away from the people of Israel is because they followed a pattern of an individual that was wrong. And that's the advice here that he tells him. He goes, don't trust in yourself. Trust in the Lord. Look there, if you will, in Proverbs chapter 14. I took verse 12 out for a reason because it says the same thing in Proverbs chapter 16. It tells us there's a way seems right to man, but the ends of is the ways of death. But look how many things that comes along here in verses 13 through 16. It tells us that we're trying to fool individuals, but we're really doing the wrong thing. And one of the things he points out is, even in laughter the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. And he reminds us here about how sometimes we don't realize someone's going through things because they pull off a very great act. And we think sometimes when we are suffering and when we are going through difficult times, we think that laughter will take the pain away. And it really doesn't. It's just kind of like anything else that we use of this world. It only takes away just for a season. And maybe sometimes we need to do is to mourn, to cry, to show emotion, to have our hearts ache, instead of trying to laugh off the problem or trying to do some other way. And that's why I believe that when we look here at verse 12, verses 13 through 16 kind of tie into this. Because we think that's the way to go through things. And even Jesus Christ shows us that not only we should have joy, but he even shows times of grief. He even shows times of anger. I had a friend not too long ago. He did a sermon and he was trying to really hammer in the thought that we should always be joyous. And I had a sermon, if you remember, and I talked about, no, we need sometimes those emotions, because those emotions will show us that same way that God is to you and I. Sometimes our God does get angry. Sometimes our God gets upset. Sometimes, like Jesus has, sometimes we cry. And we need those emotions. And we continue with that laughter and we think that it's going to take away the pain. It's not. That's not the right way to do things. And if you look there at verse 14, it talks about the backslider. The backslider in heart will be filled with the fruit of his ways. And we all understand when it comes to a backslider, especially a lot of those that are in other religious denominations, they understand what a backslider is. It's someone that was doing the right thing and now all of a sudden is doing the wrong thing. It's the individual that was supposed to do the things of the fruit of God's ways, but instead he's starting to do his own thing. There is a guy who we think about maybe that has been a backslider. You ask yourself, what happened to him? What happened to her? I had a friend when I was very young in the faith. I really admired the guy. He was just, he was a very religious individual. He liked playing music. At that time, I played music with him. And we spent a lot of each other's time's company. And then one time, right after I got married, he sent me this message about renouncing his faith. It just blew my mind. I just didn't see it coming. Sometimes we have experienced things just like that, where someone has been that backslider. He or she has been doing the right thing, then the next thing, they're doing the wrong thing. You can't understand why. That's why you see, when it comes to that backslider, he thought he was doing the right thing. Now he believes that the world is the right way to go. And that goes to verse 15. We become very naive and we start believing everything. It really blows my mind how most of our society today don't go to a factual media source. They don't go to a factual periodical. They don't go to factual resources when it comes to on the internet. No, we go to Instagram for our answers. We go to TikTok for our answers. We go to Facebook for our answers. We go to social medias where everybody can post their I believes and I think so's, and we look at that as fact. That's the same mindset we see there in verse 15. I'm not telling you not to get rid of social media. I'm telling you to search the matter out, because look how the prudent individual takes thought to his steps. He doesn't just look at something and say, well, that must be true. No, he goes and he tries to look at these things and investigates the matter. Then you go on to verse 16. And he goes on to see the individual, when he decides to take any action, he is cautious in his ways. And the reason he's cautious in his ways and turns away from evil, because he does not want to upset the Lord. Not to upset my friend, not to upset my family, but I don't want to upset God. And if I know that there is an inkling, if there's just a suspect that something I do that upsets my Lord because he tells me so in Scripture, do you not think I should stay away from it? But the sad thing is sometimes, instead of just that inkling, we just kind of be passive on it. And we say to ourselves, well, it's not going to bother anybody, it's not going to hurt anybody. But that's where we become reckless and we become careless. Look there, if you will, in Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. He says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither your ways my ways, declares the Lord. And he says, for as the heavens are higher than the air, so are the ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. If you ever take the opportunity to look at Isaiah 55, a couple of verses before that, he talks about maybe the reason why he says this. And what it is there, if you look, I think in verse 6, he talks about how the Lord will abundantly pardon. The Lord will forgive. And we've talked about this on numerous occasions about how when we look at our way to forgive and we look at the world's way to forgive, we look at there are so very many contrasted things when it comes to forgiveness. Maybe there are some things that are just hard to forgive. There's some things that people do to us, that harm us, that hurt us, and when it comes to trying to forgive them, it's really hard to do. And instead of really looking for forgiveness, we look for revenge. Or we look out a way to hurt them. Do you realize God does not do that? They'll pay for their transgressions. Remember what God says, vengeance is mine, not yours, but his. And think about how many times someone will do something to us. You think about someone that would lie to you. Let's just take a mild example here. If somebody lies to you and you catch them in that lie, you tell them, don't do that again. Second time that individual will lie, you will tell them, don't do that again. Now you're not willing to forgive them as strongly as you did the first time. And then the third time they do it again. And then you become very aggravated and you tell them, if you're going to keep doing this, I'm not going to be willing to forgive you. But I still forgive you this time. And then when they do it the fourth time, we say, no forgiveness, because they'll never learn their lesson. God's not like that with us. I don't know about you, but I have sinned on more than one occasion. And I've sinned repeatedly on things on more than one occasion. And I truly believe that if I ask for forgiveness from God, God's going to forgive me for those things. Then think about how some individuals offend us. If Claire says some snide remark to me that I take offense to, I have no problem in the world to forgive her. But if some Joe Schmo out there in the world does the exact same thing she does, I'm not going to forgive them. He has no right to do that. I know her. I don't know that guy. That's not the same with God. God reminds us that he is willing to forgive. Remember, he has a way that we should be following. Or what if the action is severe? I'm willing to forgive someone to lie to me, but I'm not willing to forgive someone who's murdered somebody close to me. Very severe situation. Because we understand in a society perspective, we understand that is a hard thing to forgive. But God's not like that. Oh, guys, think about what the Apostle Paul was like before he becomes Saul. There's things that is not written in those pages in the book of Acts that tells us how notorious Saul was. But we can understand when he talks in his epistles, he talks about there were some really bad things I did. And he talks about how great it was that this wretched man that he was, Christ forgave him. Once again, there's a way that God does it, and then there's a way we do it. And that's why you see there in verse 6 in Isaiah chapter 55, when he says he's willing to forgive, he's willing to pardon, maybe we should take those kind of mannerisms as well when he comes in verses 8 and 9. Then we go to our trusted friends. it's interesting in that passage, when we look there, he talks about, you're going to rely on yourself, or are you going to rely on Egypt? Egypt is very spoken about here because at this time, Egypt and Judah were allies. But the thing is that Egypt, he tells us, that it's like walking on a broken cane, and if he puts enough pressure on it, it's going to break it, it's going to stab his hand. He knows through experience that Egypt is weak. Do you not think for 1 second, though, that he does not think Judah is weak because he knows how weak Egypt is and they're kind of friends? That's why you see there in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, it says, whoever walks with wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. And what I want us to get at here is about how we walk with individuals. How we see when it comes to that phrase, walk with the wise or walk with fools, the companion of fools, we understand that there is some kind of attachment there. They're not total strangers. They're not just acquaintances. These are people that hang out on a regular basis. And it should not shock us when he looks at this individual who is wise, the proverb writer reminds us, that the individuals that he hangs around with is wise too. And when it comes to the companions of the foolish ones, it shouldn't be so shocked that those individuals will be in the same manner too. Look how in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, it says, don't be deceived. It says, bad company ruins good morals. When I started looking a little bit in this, there was an old rabbi proverb, and it's written like this. It says, there are 2 dry logs of wood and 1 green log. And it says, but the dry logs burn up the green log. Now, I grew up in a family of loggers, and I understand perfectly what it's talking about here. You understand that dry wood is worthless. And dry wood is not getting any nourishment. But if it has a green log next to it, it has a green log getting close to it, it takes all the nutrients and all the things that makes that log green. It is siphoning anything good out of that log to the point where it becomes just like them. I truly understand why this rabbinic proverb would talk about this kind of notion. Because it shouldn't shock us, and we shouldn't be naive to think that the companion of another with excess time we will become just like them. Look there in Psalm chapter 41, verse 9. Remember, this is about David here. And you look at that and you say, who was the close friend and who he trusted? If this is David writing this psalm, you see that he says there is somebody that has hurt him. Someone who he had trust in, and now he's the enemy. And I think it's Ahithophel. That was one of his counselors at the time. Because if you look at it back in Kings, you see where Ahithophel was his counselor. He was his prime minister. He was a close companion of David's. And then when Absalom came along and wanted to take over his kingdom, he left David and started to go with Absalom. Can you imagine that not only that your son has tried to kill you and take over your kingdom, but the people who you trust the most are doing the exact same thing? I don't know about you, brethren, but I'm getting ready to do my 24th year, I think, of graduation. 24 years since I've been graduated out of high school. And I think about the people I hang out with now when we go to reunions. I didn't hang with at high school. And some of the best friends I have in high school, I don't hang out with them now. And it's not because I hate them. It's because I took a different path. And they took different paths. And sometimes we got to realize that when we get older, if we are going to take this path according to God, that there is going to be some relationships that's going to be severed. Look here in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 26. It tells us here, there's one who is righteous as a guide to his neighbor. He says, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. It reminds us, it gives us the idea that there's going to be an individual who's going to try to help you out, not only physical and mental perspective, but also a spiritual one too. There's going to be one that's going to guide you to the right way. There's going to be one that influences you and do the right thing. And it's not going to have to be some give back to give back. There's not going to be this hiding of things or trying to lead this individual astray. One of my kids has a friend that they had a spiritual discussion not too long ago. And one of the things that he said to him was, don't tell your dad that we're having this discussion. You know, it's one of my boys. And I said, son, I said, if somebody has to tell you that, one, it tells me that they don't have great faith in what they believe in. And two, it also tells me that it's a red flag for false teaching and also ones that cause division. If they have to hide the things that they believe in, if they got to hide these things and tell somebody not to talk to the other guy about this, there's not really a lot of confidence in what they believe in. Or they're trying to find enough people who believe in the same things they do, that way they can gang up on someone. But if you have to hide these things, you're not trusting in your own faith, you're trusting in a lot of other things that have nothing to do with faith. And the sad thing is, sometimes that's what we do. We try to go the wrong way, and we think it's the right way. And we don't ask ourselves at the time when we have these relationships, is this the relationship I really want to be in? Is this the relationship I want to be in with my friends? Is this the relationship I want to be with my significant other, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my fiance, my husband, my wife? We see that there is those situations. We got to ask ourselves, is this not only beneficial for me now, but is it beneficial when I go down the road? And I take the more serious steps. Look at how David tells us sometimes that our own enemy, just as Jesus warns us, are we of one's household. David tells us here that if it was an enemy that he could see afar away, it would probably be easier to deal with than someone who's that close to him. Once again, I think it's talking about Ahithophel. And he talks here very wholeheartedly about this betrayal. And he says, for it's not an enemy who taunts me that I could bear it. It's not an adversary who deals insolent with me that I could hide from him. But it's you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We used to take sweet counsel together. Within God's house, we walked in a throng. Our strongest deception is not going to be the enemy we see miles away. It's not going to be the individual when we say, well, I know that guy's bad news. Just by the way he's coming, by the way he looks, by the way he acts, I know this is going to be trouble. And we'll take caution to that. But we never take caution to the people who are closest to us. We don't do it with our classmates. We don't do it with our boyfriends or girlfriends. We believe that because we love each other, we trust each other. When we come to our friends, we think that, well, because we like each other and we hang out with each other, that we can trust each other. But we don't realize that sometimes those relationships are dangerous and toxic. Look how even this king of Assyria even suggests, and this is our next point, how even their God is not going to be able to save them. Because he says there, he goes, we've dealt with other gods. And how did those gods pan out when we went against these people? If those gods didn't help him, why do you think this God's going to help you? That comes to my next point. Go to the book of James. Now, first chapter, starting in chapter 2. And we're going to read through verse 8. It says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generally to all who without reproach, and it will be given unto him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man and unstable in all ways. When it comes to our wisdom, and when it comes to our trials, when it comes to overcoming the difficult things, let's put our trust in God and ask him. And don't be the individual that doesn't ask him in faith. Don't be the individual that it doesn't come the way you want to. You begin to doubt, because you'll be an individual that will be deceived by anything. You'll be the individual that will, just like Hezekiah, he feels that there is some other way than going to God to solve this problem. When that king of Assyria comes to Jerusalem and says, you better listen to me or we're going to take everything from you, he does go to God first. What he does, he thinks that the way he's going to solve his problem is he's going to take all the gold and all the silver. He's going to strip the temple, Solomon's temple, and if you read about Solomon's temple, everything about it was gold. Everything about it was bronze. Everything about it was silver. It was all kinds of metals in that temple, and it was something of magnificence. And Hezekiah strips everything out of that temple, and he gives it to this king because he believes if I give him this money, he'll leave us alone. Wrong. Because if that was the case, then we don't have the next few verses of 1 Kings chapter 18, or 2 Kings chapter 18. Money will solve the problem. It's the same thing that we do today. We believe that when it comes to our own way, it will solve the problem. We don't take this trust in God. We take this trust in everything. It's surprising that some professing Christians will take more faith in a magic 8-ball than they will God. It's crazy that some people will take those little tests or those little quizzes on Facebook or on Instagram or on TikTok and put more faith in those things than what the will of God and its rewards will tell you. Let's not be an individual. When we say we believe in God, we have some doubt in our mind. Let's put our trust in him. Finally, look at Matthew chapter 14. The same thing happens to us today as the same thing that happens to Peter here. When he is supposed to go walk on the water with Christ, and he starts successfully, they see this figure coming on the water, and they're very fearful. They're not fearful of the storm right now. They're fearful of the individual that's coming. And that individual comes as Christ. And when they said, Lord, if it is you, Peter tells us, he says, command me to come to you on the water. And he says, come. And you see that he got out of the boat and he walked on the water. Until he started focusing on things other than Christ. When he looks at the waves crashing, when he looks at the storm and how the winds are going and how boisterous all the things are happening around him, when he starts focusing on these things, there's where he begins to sink. And he says, save me. There's a reason why, when we look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, it tells us without faith it's impossible to please him. One of the biggest fights I deal with right now when it comes to studying outside the church is faith without works. This idea that I don't have to do anything because Christ has done it for me. The idea that because of Jesus' sacrifice, and it is necessary, don't get me wrong on that by any means, that because of his sacrifice, I have the rewards of heaven. All I got to do is put my faith in him. But if you look there in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 11, it tells us without faith it's impossible to please him. Do you see all the other individuals, what they're doing? They got their trust in God. They got their faith in they got their faith in God. But realize that all these individuals that is talked about there in Hebrews chapter 11 are doing things to show that they have their faith and their trust in God. They do these things because they have the faith in God. They don't just blindly say, well, I believe in him and therefore I am saved. No, there is things that was done in order to follow him. Just like Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 8, verse 20, it says, teach them to observe all things, and I'll be with you always. Observation is not just looking at something. Observation is looking and realizing what you need to do, and then put it into practice. That's what Jesus is telling us to do. Look at these things, realize you have something to do, and put it into practice. And if we're not willing to put those things in practice, we don't have faith. As simple as that is. For all he has to do is come. He focuses on everything but that command. I encourage you here this morning. For those who struggle with their faith, can you take the opportunity here this morning, while we have the time, while we have the moments, while we open this offering to you, to take the time and make a change? The world has its rewards. And the Hebrew writer reminds us they're passing. But the treasures that we see when it comes to those heavenly treasures, those are the things that we should look for. Repentance is something we need to do. Baptism is something we need to do. I still haven't heard the argument yet from any individual who says baptism is not necessary, but yet encourages you to do the exact same thing. So, why not now? Why not take the opportunity while we still have the opportunity before us? If someone needs to respond, let's take the opportunity to do these things right now. Won't you come while we stand, while we sing?